Okay, well, this week we saw, kind of blow up the aftermath of journalist Olivia Nuzzi, her emotional affair with RFK Jr. that took place during 2024, the absolute crash out of her former fiance, journalist Ryan Lizza, on his Substack. And her book, she wrote a book about it this week. Tim Miller did an interview with her earlier this week that was different than other interviews that have been taking place because Tim Miller's Tim Miller, and he interviewed her from a very human perspective, but really pressed her. And that interview, while it's difficult to watch, it really demonstrated that she's not taking accountability for anything that happened to her. And within 2 days of that interview airing, Vanity Fair was like, yeah, we're not going to renew your contract. I think she has basically completely destroyed her career as a journalist. And I want to talk more about that in a moment as it relates to other journalists who are women, other journalists who are young women. She has basically rendered herself unemployable because of the things that she did. I mean, while she was assigned to cover RFK Jr., she had this relationship with him while she was engaged to Ryan Lizza. But she was working the media for the benefit of RFK Jr. She was going out and finding negative stories about him before they broke and telling him about them ahead of time so that he could get ahead of them. The one being the dead bear cub in the park story. She told him about that story was about to break. And so he made a video trying to explain that before that story broke, and really, really, really violated egregiously a lot of journalistic ethics and journalistic standards. And so her career has basically been destroyed. Her book is not selling. Her book, I haven't read it. I'm not going to read it. But from what I understand, the book is a failure. And as was demonstrated in the interview with Tim Miller, because she's not being totally upfront. She's not releasing all of the information about RFK Jr. that she has, and she's not taking any accountability for her own actions. And it's like that was the mindset that she was in when she wrote this book. And so the book reflects that as well. RFK Jr. doesn't seem to be suffering any consequences whatsoever for this, for his relationship with her. He's gotten some questions about it, but his job's not in danger. His status is not in danger. Which I'm sure will sound very familiar to a lot of women watching this video. He has experienced almost zero consequences, where she has seen basically the wholesale destruction of her career, which, regardless of what you think about what she did or how she handled this situation, she was a great journalist and reporter. And she, when she's in the right mindset, not where she was when she wrote this book, she's an excellent writer as well. I really enjoyed reading her profiles of people for years. And she did an excellent job at that, and which just makes this all the more like tragic, dumb, and unnecessary. But I was thinking about this when I was driving up here. Well, and her ex-fiance Ryan Lizza is compounding all of this, because obviously he was aware that her book was coming out this week. So rather than just like not say anything, or write one article about it and then move on and be done, he's written a multi-series of articles on his Substack seeking to preempt or discredit this book before its release. It's an I'm a hurt ex-fiance crash out that is just bad. It's just bad. But, you know, I mean, I heard somebody talking about this on a podcast yesterday when I was on the road, and I was just thinking, like, the damage that Olivia Nuzzi has done to other female journalists, who I'm sure within Washington, D.C., within big organizations like the New York Times, the Washington Post, LA Times, Chicago Tribune, struggle enough to gain credibility and respectability from their male counterparts, from their peers, or at broadcast network journalists. And just thinking about how far Olivia Nuzzi has set all of those efforts back by what she did, how she's handled it, and how she's handled the aftermath, you know, by still refusing to accept any accountability for the things that she did. It's just like, what the fuck, man? You know, and it just reminds me a lot of all the women that I know who are attorneys and the sexism and the harassment and the misogyny that they deal with. You know, the endless stories that I heard from my mom when I was younger during the first 10 or 15 years that she was practicing law. Stories that are just like, your jaw would be on the floor. I mean, there was one time she was in court. A judge stopped a hearing, called just her up to the bench in the middle of a hearing. The other attorney, the judge was like, "You stay at counsel table." He called just my mom up to the bench to tell her that she looked amazingly beautiful that day, and then told her to go back to counsel table. Did that in the middle of a fucking hearing. And another time she was doing a hearing, this was like, I don't know, early 90s maybe. And, you know, my mom was a fighter and she was pretty fierce. And she was, I think a lot of the men who she worked with would consider her to be very loud, and not in a complimentary way. And she didn't let attorneys or judges get away with shit, or parties on the other sides of her cases. And she was very driven. She was very motivated. She was very dedicated. And she was very good at what she did. And that alienated a lot of men, you know, because my mom was also objectively an extremely beautiful woman physically. And one time a judge interrupted her during a hearing and was like, and just said from the bench, on the record, open court, "Does your husband know what you're doing? Does your husband know what you do for a living? Does your husband know that you behave this way in court?" Because she was winning. And, you know, so it's like when I hear stories like this Olivia Nuzzi stuff, it's just like, I mean, imagine being a young woman who's a journalist. You know, you're like 2 years into your career, you're starting to get some headway, you know, and then a very well-respected young female journalist does something like this. And you're going to get painted with that brush. And it just sucks. It just sucks.